Okay, let's get started today. As usual, uh, I have way too much, and it's just the way it is going to be, I think, from now on. Things are just happening too much. It's like everything is, as I said in the title, everything is in overdrive. I clearly had more than enough to talk about this Sunday by Tuesday afternoon this week. And I think some Sunday I'm just going to sit up here and pick the news feed off of my phone from my Facebook page and just do that, sort of like a live update, um, or update my live update all the time. Things are really converging very quickly. So I'm going to jump right into it. This week I'm going to try to do something a little bit different. I have a long section on UNESCO and Hebron because I think it's very, very important. And I really want to focus on that. Not the least of which is I was just in Hebron about 6 weeks ago. And it really had a big impact on me because I don't think I really realized the importance of Hebron in the whole scheme of things to divide the land of Israel. And it really is the epicenter there. So we'll talk about that about halfway through. The world is crazy. This report, and sometimes I don't even remember, like by Saturday, I looked back and it was like, did that happen this week? I mean, it seems like it happened 3 weeks ago because it seems like 3 weeks of news happen every day. And so there was this report on Monday, and I don't remember if I reported on this, I think it came out Monday. This person had a baby in Canada, and she convinced the local authorities in Canada to put, you see under sex there it says you. It means unclassified. She does not want her baby to be identified as male or female. She, who I believe was, I don't know, I think if you saw a picture of this person, you would say, well, that's weird, because she looks, the person, I don't know what she is, or her, him. I don't know. Okay, so I'm confused. I have gender confusion about her, not about me, or him, or them. Looks feminine, but has a beard and mustache, a very light beard and mustache. So here's what she says. Baby becomes first to have gender marked unknown. An 8-month-old baby is possibly the first person in the world to have their gender marked as unknown on their health card. Siri Atlee's gender has marked with a U on her Canadian health card, standing for undetermined or unassigned. The baby's parent, Corey Doty, does not identify as male or female and prefers to use the pronoun they, and wants to raise Cyril's genderless until the baby has a sense of self and a command of vocabulary to tell me who they are. Look, there was an article that's trying to think who wrote it. I don't remember where I saw it exactly. The article says this: they are coming for your kids. Oh, I know who it was. It's the lady who is the president of the American College of Pediatrics. I don't know if she's actively practicing anymore. She formed that with, I think his name is Dr. Larry McHugh, who used to be at Johns Hopkins. And it's one of the three major pediatric medical practice associations in the country. And she's not even sure she could go into hospitals now and get credentials because of her views on transgenderism. She thinks it's child abuse. This is child abuse. This kid, I pray that this kid gets away from this person. But it won't happen. In her article, she says there used to be maybe 20 clinics around the country focused on pediatric gender confusion issues. Then it grew in 1 year to 45 and soon will be over 200, I believe she says in the article, in the United States. These kids are going to grow up confused, like you wouldn't believe. There was an interview, I was going to play a clip of it, but I just don't have time today, but there was a man from Philadelphia who's written an article and a book called Beyond Trans, Beyond Gender Identity, Why Gender Identity Doesn't Matter. And I saw an interview with him and talk about confused. And he says, well, people who want to tell you whether you're male or female are just into a power trip. Like you wanting to stop people from noting the God-given distinction between male and female is not a power trip. And so what you find is another person on the left that's projecting. They're the fascists. They're the ones who want to control thought. They're the ones who are against freedom. So pray for this kid. Apparently born a female because they say her. It's just, when you read these articles about these people, what they're doing. Oh, by the way, the guy who wrote the book Beyond Trans, his name is Keith Fogg Davis. And I'm telling you, if anybody ever had a middle name that fits, it's this guy, Keith Fogg, F-O-G-G, emphasize Fogg. This is a bill in California that was introduced to ban child marriage. One of the examples they cited was of someone in a religious cult who was 15 and was married to a 28-year-old. The person who introduced the legislation in California is surprised now because certain people have come out against the bill. Now, you would think that we don't want to force children, young people, into marriages with older people, right? Even in a religious cult. So who opposes this bill? The ACLU? Planned Parenthood? This is insanity. I don't know how else to describe it. Here's a just to show you kind of what's going on. Harvard Divinity School has a new professorship, the T.J. Dermot Dunphy Professorship of Religion, Violence, and Peace Building. Now, I'm sure that's they're looking for somebody from Bob Jones, right, or someplace like that to come and teach. They want to appoint a scholar practitioner in the T.J. School of Religion, Violence, and Peace Building. We seek a person whose work examines the significance of religion as it relates to sources of violence and the practices of peace building in the contemporary world. The candidate might bring historical, theological, sociological, or anthropological approaches to the study of religious traditions, ethnic identities, communal tensions, or interfaith relations, especially as they relate to violence and peace building. Applicants must be competent in research languages appropriate to their area of specialization. I think that means you have to be able to understand this gobbledygook. In other words, that's the language of research language. What else does it say? It says, now I read that one. It is understood, see there at the bottom, it is understood that applicants will employ forms of analysis that address race, gender, sexuality, and or other intersecting forms of social power, such as womanist, feminist, and or queer approaches at the Divinity School. And it's amazing what you can get for $60,000 tuition. You can get into these programs. So that just shows sort of where they're going. Academics are afraid, though, this is from the Daily Telegraph, that if they speak out about these things, just like the lady at the American College of Pediatrics noted in her article about they're coming for your children, if you talk about these things in certain circles, you're at risk for losing your job or not getting tenure or getting fired. And I think there's a concern among people even working in the secular workplace that this is starting to seep into the secular workplace. And they don't care. In fact, here on Breitbart reported yesterday, CNN, they need to be, remember the thing that they put CNN on the head of Vince McMahon, and Trump punched it out, and it got posted, and it got tweeted around the world. Well, CNN now, they've sort of gone after the person they think that created that and said, if you can apologize for what you did, but if you waver from that apology, we're coming after you. We're going to expose who you are. It's extortion. And you would think CNN, they were called on it. Some people suggested that might be illegal, what you're doing. They cited some federal statutes. And so here's somebody from a CNN host comes out and says, they need to be reined in. They need to be exposed if they're bigots. We're going to go after them. We don't care. Why? Because we're smarter than everybody else. In Germany, look here. This is from this is not from a like Breitbart or a right-wing magazine on the left. Germany raided 36 homes for people who were suspected of posting hate speech or things negative, usually about Islam, online on Facebook. 36 police raids with SWAT teams, guns and everything, to seize computers. And my concern is that Germany thinks this is okay. Now, look, I don't like necessarily Nazi comparisons, but Germany at one point thought what they did to the Jews was okay too, at least the people in charge. And Dennis Prager this week suggested on his radio program that he's thinking of coming up with a bumper sticker that says, Germany is always wrong. Nice people, you know, great beer, good brats, that type of thing. But politically, they're always wrong. And it's hard to argue with that conclusion. I cannot remember the exact, it might have been Front Page or another organization like the Family Research Council. Notice that there's a thing called GuideStar, which tells people where they can give their money. You know, you don't want to give your money to hate groups. And so here are 40 hate groups. And they all came from the Southern Poverty Law Center, which itself is a left-wing hate group, unmistakably. I mean, local people, we've talked about Linda Harvey, Dave Daubenmire, you know, Dave takes food down to people when they have floods and that. He's a hate group. Pass the Salt is a hate group. Linda Harvey's ministry is a hate group. And so there's 40 people. They wrote an article. They've gotten GuideStar to pull the names down, but it was Family Research Council and others, and signed by a lot of organizations. You can find the letter online. But this is what they're trying to do. Southern Poverty Law Center, which got a lot of money from the government to do this back during the Obama administration. I showed you the seminar a couple years ago at Georgetown University, where they were going to identify hate groups for the Department of Justice. Well, who do you think they're identifying? Do you think, and as this letter notes, note this is, the hate group list is nothing more than a political weapon targeting people it deems to be its political enemies. The list is ad hoc, partisan, and agenda-driven. The SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, doesn't even pretend to identify groups on the political left that engage in hate. Mosque or Islamist groups that promote radical speech inciting anti-Semitism and actual violence are not listed by the SPLC, even though they may have been publicly identified after terrorist attacks. Radical, violent, leftist environmentalists or speech-suppressing thugs like the rioting Antifa movement received no mention from the SPLC. Get used to it. There's a good article by Alexandra DeSanctis at National Review talking about that the people on the left and in the Democratic Party have realized that they're not connecting with religious people. Well, they are connecting with religious people. They're connecting with people who follow the religion of leftism, but they're wondering about all these other people. And she cites an opinion piece that was on Independence Day that was in the New York Times editorial page, Thomas Jefferson's Bible Teaching. Now, we can respect Jefferson. He was a deist. He was not, I don't think, a Christian. He didn't believe in the miraculous. He was very oriented towards science. And what Jefferson did essentially with his Bible was he went through and literally cut out all of the parts that he thought were miraculous and really shouldn't be believed. And so this editorial by Annette Gordon-Reed and Peter Onuff in the New York Times, this op-ed on Independence Day, says we need to be more like Thomas Jefferson. Cut things out of the Bible because that will make us more tolerant and open to everything. So in this article, Why Progressivism and Religion Don't Go Together, it says this: progressivism has always been premised on the notion that a man has a changeable nature and thus is able to achieve perfection during his time on earth. As a result, progressives consistently maintain that government is responsible for transforming men and women into perfect creatures. They develop programs and reforms suited not for man as he is, but for man as he ought to be, and progressives would argue for man as he could become with the right societal structures. In short, progressivism and religion, understood as a fundamental reliance on God rather than on oneself or other men, are inherently incompatible. Where progressivism asserts that properly ordered government can and should transform man into a perfect being who lives in a man-made utopia, religion insists that God, not government, is responsible for changing men's hearts. And this is a great divide that we have in our culture today. In this article, it mentions Jefferson loved science. And when I get to the part about Hebron, I'm going to talk about Genesis, the book of Genesis. Because what Genesis clearly establishes is what is in conflict today. So when you get into science and you get into the creation versus evolution debate, what are you into? You're into a debate about the opening chapters of the book of Genesis. Did God create the world or not? When you get into other parts of the Torah, did God lay down his law and principles for mankind at Mount Sinai and give them to the Jewish people? Give them to Moses and the Jewish people? And the answer is yes. And so what you see, I think, if you look carefully through those opening books of the Bible, particularly Genesis, the things that are established there are going to be in conflict in the end times. You see it. You see the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, conflict about what that means, creation versus science. And we'll see about the city of Hebron in a few moments. Unless Democratic politicians understand and address those legitimate concerns, they won't sway those who reject the notion that government should take the place of God. I went back and I found this article. It was a blog post from, if you want to destroy your church, follow liberals' advice. And they went into some of the things that have been laid out in a CNN article by Rachel Held Evans, who I've played some clips of her talking about, laughing about, oh, we need to get rid of these notions about homosexuality. And she had laid out a year or two ago on a CNN post that she put up, or that they publish, about what should we do in church? How should we change things? So here's her bullet point list of what the church needs to do to change. What millennials really want from the church is not a change in style, but a change in substance. We want an end to the culture wars. We want a truce between science and faith. Do you see right there that what is established in the beginning part of Genesis is now to be off the table? We want to be known what we stand for, not what we're against. Unless you're her, you can be against things, but that's not being against things because I'm right and you're wrong. So you can't be against me. The intellectual disconnect of these things is just mind-blowing. We want to ask questions that don't have predetermined answers. We want churches that emphasize an allegiance to the kingdom of God over an allegiance to a single political party or a single nation. We want our LGBT friends to feel truly welcome in our faith communities. Now this. We know the Catholic Church has had a terrible problem with pedophile priests. In the United States, I believe all but 2 of the Catholic dioceses have entered into very large multi-million-dollar settlements with regard to sexual abuse by priests of underage, mostly males, but often females as well. So this week in the Vatican, this is the headline from the Daily Mail, Vatican police, and it was all over the place, Vatican police break up gay orgy at home of secretary of one of Pope Francis's key advisors. Raided flat belonging to the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And it wasn't so much the gay part, the gay orgy part, it was that they were using drugs. Now, the Catholic Church has a problem, and this is a man named Michael Voorhees, and he writes a blog called The Church Militant, and he has a little program that he does called The Vortex. Now, I'm not endorsing what he believes. I want that to be clear. But I think he makes a very good point. He went to a big Catholic conference where all these Catholic leaders and bishops and archbishops came to, and because he's a very conservative Catholic, he essentially, you can also find the video online where he was kicked out. He was told he couldn't come in. He's a very conservative Catholic, wants the Catholic Church to be restored to all of its sacraments and whatnot, and he can't come to a Catholic conference. This is not too dissimilar what happens to people who speak out against bad things going on in evangelicalism. And the conferences that take place in the evangelical church, Catalyst, Willow Creek, that I would describe best as fuzzy. What are you supposed to get out of this stuff? So he went to this conference and he talked to the people that were going to the meetings, and I just want you to see a little clip that he says about what's going on in the Catholic Church and show you that this is exactly what's going on in the evangelical church. There's an attack on institutions. So I'm not supporting Roman Catholicism, okay? I've spoken clearly about that in the past. But I want you to extrapolate and see what he says in just this short video clip about what he saw at this conference.
And this issue, the necessity of the church and adhering to her teachings, seems to be the shaky ground issue, because it's not entirely clear, which it should be at a conference like this, it's not clear that there's any real unity of that single issue among the delegates or even the bishops. Some are clearly in that camp, no doubt about it. They're inside the conferences and their talks, and they're concerned. Others are just sort of caught up in the event and the emotion of it and seem a little clueless about the larger issues. And then there is a third group, sort of, also good-hearted and well-intentioned, who seem to understand the problems in the church, at least to some degree, and are yet unwilling to take that last step and grapple with the hard reality that this has all been orchestrated in such a way so as to deliberately have chaos in the church.
And I think he's right, and the same thing applies in evangelicalism. I've been to a lot of conferences, and I've come away from these conferences, not ones I've spoken at, by the way, so those are always those are excluded. But I've been to conferences, sort of like the Catalyst and the Willow Creek type conferences, and I walk away thinking, like, what was that all about? I feel like I just wasted my time coming to this because there's nothing clear. And I think he makes a good point that this has been a deliberate design by some people to cause chaos in the church. And it's undermining the faith, and this all fits into the end time apostasy and falling away from the faith. I don't think it's going to improve. I would suspect that if people spoke out more, and there are a lot of people speaking out, but I'm sure that some of those that speak out would try to get into a Willow Creek conference or a conference at Bethel Church in Reading or something, they would be banned just like he was banned from this Catholic conference. And this is part of the problem. This was a blog post by a pastor of a church, the ridiculous emphasis Christians place on the Bible. Now, he comes in and he says, I started a small church and now we're running over 2,000, and boy, aren't I great. And I look through it, and there's some things that he does that are pretty good. But then he puts up and I don't know if he's trying to be provocative or not, but, whether he's trying to be provocative or not, what he's being is not faithful to the faith. And you can see in some of his blog posts where he'll get into it, somebody will confront him about a position that he has, and then he'll sort of do the thing. He'll attack the person in a blog without mentioning their name or anything about, boy, they're just stuck in the Bible too much. But listen to what he says. Most Christians today assume that to be a Christian means to have a personal relationship with the Bible instead of the risen Jesus. So what he's done right out of the box is he's created a straw man. No true Christian believes this, Brian Jones. So stop with this nonsense. You're not being clever. You're being unfaithful to the faith. And he says, there's examples. Instead of the risen Jesus, to be consumed with it, to obsess over its details, to memorize curiously meaningless trivia about it. And I can guarantee you that if he watched what I'm going to do on Hebron in a few minutes, he would say, what's that got to do with anything? It's just a story in the Bible. It doesn't have any application to today. To study its root words and the historical data underpinning every sentence, every chapter, and every book. That's bad. But if what if we're totally missing the point? What if one of the reasons we're so spiritually dead and the church is abysmally failing at its mission is not because we study the Bible too little, but too much? I'm encouraged that I'm hearing a lot of negative feedback. Instead of being out and about extending the works of the kingdom, Christians are wasting precious time excessively studying the Bible in groups and feeling quite content that if they're practicing the spiritual disciplines at home, that they've done their duty and can call it a day. Who gives a crap if I ever open my mouth and share my faith today, or forgive those who mess me over, or share money with those in need, or my house with the homeless? All is good. I read my Bible today. And there, I think, in a few short sentences, you have one of the major problems in the evangelical church today. We don't worship the Bible. We worship God and Jesus, but He is revealed to us through this fantastic book that has all of these wonderful details so we can understand and make sense of the world. And he just kind of dismisses it. Now, I'm sure if he was confronted, he would say, well, that's not what I meant. Okay, well, words mean things, and God meant things when He put them in His Word for us to learn, and for us to study, and for us to obsess over the details, and for us to memorize. Okay, now, I want you to see this connection between sort of this cultural, religious conflict that's going on between the left and the right, and how it plays out both in the geopolitical world and in the spiritual world. Daniel Greenfield, who I really respect, I love his writing, he writes at a number of different places, one of which is Front Page Magazine, and he writes this: why ISIS isn't going anywhere? And this was in the New York Times, I believe this morning, or yesterday, I think this morning. State crumbling, ISIS is reclaiming its insurgent roots. Retaining its potency despite ground losses, ideologically still spurs global attack. So even the New York Times says, yeah, we've kicked ISIS for the most part out of Mosul. They're losing their state in Iraq, or in Raqqa. Things are crumbling for them. They're being moved out of Syria. They're losing their influence there. But they're not going away, is the point that Daniel Greenfield says. ISIS hasn't been defeated. ISIS has been defeated. That's the official word out of Iraq, but don't count it out just yet. We beat ISIS twice before. Once in its previous incarnation as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and in even its earlier incarnation as Saddam Hussein's regime, whose Sunni Baathists went on to play a crucial role in ISIS. Each time it was reborn as another murderous monstrosity. We don't know what the next incarnation will look like, but considering Saddam Hussein's rape rooms, Al-Qaeda in Iraq's love of suicide bombings, and ISIS taking public torture to a new level, it will be bad. We beat Saddam, Al-Qaeda, and the Islamic State. But it keeps coming back because we don't understand what it is, and we don't get it because we don't understand what Islamic terrorism is. Islamic terrorists are not a tiny minority of extremists who pervert Islam. They are Islam. ISIS keeps coming back because it's rooted in the local Sunni Islamic Arab population and the religion of Islam. The Sunni link is why ISIS keeps popping back up. Bush suppressed Al-Qaeda in Iraq by allying with Sunni tribes. Obama made a deal with Iran and let its Shiites dominate Iraq. Sunnis flocked to ISIS ex-Baathists who promised to bring back the good old days of Saddam's supremacy for Sunnis. Critics who accuse the U.S. of creating ISIS by bombing Iraq miss the point. ISIS is the latest embodiment of Sunni supremacism and historical nostalgia for the Abbasid Caliphate. Both Saddam and the Caliph of ISIS capitalized on that nostalgia the way that Hitler did on Charlemagne. We're going to create this great empire. We're not just fighting a bunch of ragged terrorists, we're fighting against the sense of manifest destiny of a large Muslim population, not just in Iraq and Syria, but in London, Paris, and every state in America. We didn't create it, and it isn't going anywhere. We can't defeat it without breaking the historical aspirations of the Sunni population. That is what we are up against. Like the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and other Islamic terrorist groups, the Islamic State was never very good at running things. He goes on to point out later, barbarians never are. The Palestinian Authority won't make peace with Israel for the same reason that Hamas won't make peace with the PA. Statehood is a compelling imperative. It requires hard work and reality. It's much easier to send off a few useful idiots to blow themselves up and then collect the Qatari checks. The original Islamic conquests wrecked the societies and cultures they overran the way that barbarians always do. They wouldn't have succeeded if civilization had not been in a state of collapse when they came in. And that's the point. That today's Islamic conquests are a similar reaction to our civilizational decline. But as long as we can send jets and drones to wreak havoc on Islamic terrorists anywhere in the world, the conquest can only work on a demographic, not a military level. ISIS claimed that it could win a military showdown. It was wrong. And now we have, Linda Sarsour. This is what she said at a speech at the Islamic Society of North America.
Sisters and brothers, it's been 16, almost 17 years since the horrific attacks of 9/11. And we still, as a community, find ourselves unprepared in so many moments. Why, sisters and brothers? Why are we so unprepared? Why are we so afraid of this administration and the potential chaos that they will ensue on our community? And we already saw their potential when they come out every few weeks. Muslim ban 1, Muslim ban 2, Muslim ban 3. They are relentless, they are persistent and consistent, and want to see how much we as a community can endure, and want to see who our friends are and how hard we're going to fight back against this administration. And I hope that we, when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad, that we are struggling against tyrants and rulers, not only abroad in the Middle East or in the other side of the world, but here in these United States of America, where you have fascists and white supremacists and Islamophobes reigning in the White House. We have to stay outraged. Do not criticize me when I...
Well, she went on to say, yeah, I said jihad, but you're misinterpreting what I said. And this always happens. Douglas Murray, I saw a debate with him. He's got a great book out called The Slow Death of Europe or Strange Death of Europe. And he's a conservative guy, and he speaks about this very truthfully. And he says, well, I'll talk about him in a minute, but his point in the debate that he had was, well, every time somebody brings up that Islam is doing this, they say that's not Islam, and look at the Crusades, or look at what the Jews did in the Old Testament. And so all Christians are bad and all Jews are bad because of what happened hundreds and thousands of years ago, but current things that Islam is doing are not Islam. And it's very strange. It's incoherent. President Trump touched on this theme in his speech in Poland the other day.
100 years after the entry of American forces into World War I, the transatlantic bond between the United States and Europe is as strong as ever, and maybe in many ways even stronger. This continent no longer confronts the specter of communism. But today we're in the West, and we have to say there are dire threats to our security and to our way of life. You see what's happening out there. They are threats. We will confront them. We will win. But they are threats.
And the Polish people, they were chanting Donald Trump, and they seemed to really like him. And the common people in Europe, a lot of them like Donald Trump. And it's interesting, Trump is considered to be, by the left, a megalomaniac. He wants to control everything, and he's all this. But it's interesting that out of the G20 countries, one has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accords, the United States. So 5% of the countries in the Paris Accords have withdrawn. And 95% of the world is following people that, well, we can control the world. Melanie Phillips noted this interesting discussion that took place, and I don't have time to play it, on the BBC about was Trump right anyway? This lady, she's a professor at Oxford. This is a guy who was involved in the British government. She writes for The Economist. And they're like, oh, no, he's not right. I mean, what's he mean, the West? I mean, what's this thing, the West? What do we have that's so good? Why are we better than anybody else? Why don't we just and the implication is, why don't we just let Islam, the barbarians, overrun us? Because, well, they had their own cultural viewpoint. And what Trump said applies to these elites in spades because they don't understand the big issue, it appears. This is the book that I was talking about, The Dying of the Right, an article in The Spectator by Douglas Murray, and The Strange Death of Europe. He has an article on this morning's Gatestone's Institute, Europe's Mass Migration, the Leaders versus the Public. And he cites Bill Gates. Bill Gates comes in and says, the more generous you are, the more word gets around about this, which in turn motivates more people to leave Africa. Germany cannot possibly take in the huge number of people who are wanting to make their way to Europe. Now, does anybody run around calling Bill Gates a Islamophobe or a hater or selfish? He's got a few bucks that he could give away, So the survey that he references in the second paragraph, the survey found that 76% of the public across the EU believe that the EU's handling of the migration crisis of recent years has been poor. There's not one country in the EU in which the majority of the public differs from that consensus. But the politicians are doing it. At the same time, the public has known what the politicians are doing is unsustainable. There's been a vast effort to control what the European publics have been allowed to say. German Chancellor Angela Merkel went so far as to urge Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg to limit posts on social media that were critical of her policies. And we'll go out and we'll raid your house. You think that might suppress free speech just a tad? But then in response to this is this weird. Remember I showed you the pyramid and Macron doing this and the all-seeing eye above his head? And look, they either really believe this stuff or they're just doing it to mock people that they think are conspiracy theorists. But I lean towards the fact that they're really serious about what they're doing, and they understand exactly what they're doing and the symbols that they're trying to use. And so here was Macron this week giving a speech to a joint session of the French Parliament at Versailles, the palace of the Sun King. Now, I want you to remember what's been said here previously in some of the lectures we've had, that when the French Revolution occurred against that Sun King, they said, they did it equality and libertas, liberty and equality. That's what they were after, the progressive. It was the early, and what did they do? Over 109 years that the revolution went on, or 100 years. They beheaded tens of thousands of people. Now, I will note there's two things going on in the world. Okay, now I don't want to be dogmatic and say this is the way prophecy is going to unfold in Europe or the Islamic world. I'm just telling you that there seems to be a union between the progressive left and Islam, and one of the common things that they have in their history is beheading people. And that is referenced in the book of Revelation as to how people are martyred in the end times. So I see I see chaos in the Islamic world, but I see a lot of beheading going on, and I see the rise of this progressivism in Europe among the elites that also beheaded people. And so I'm just sort of putting one and one together, and I'm pay attention to what's going on in the rise of both of these and how they're unified in many respects. Because you'll never hear this guy, I don't think, get out and roundly criticize Islam. And so here was the symbology of Macron walking in to the Versailles Palace, and I mean the pageantry and walking down there between the military guys, and then he walks up and he begins to give his speech. And in his speech, he said that he plans a Jupiterian presidency as a remote, dignified figure like the Roman god of gods who weighs his rare pronouncements carefully. It would be a marked break from his unpopular and often mocked predecessor, Hollanday's man of the people style. While many in France still hold dear the trappings of presidential power, Macron's style has grated with others who lament the strong powers that the constitution drawn up by the war hero Charles de Gaulle bestows on the presidency. But, they note, a commanding majority of the parliament are newly elected, and they're going to be totally beholden to Emmanuel Macron. And this guy was on a debate. It's in English. You can find it on the France 24 media site on YouTube. And he said, this is scary. That's what he was saying. It's scary what's going on. And then somebody said, oh, that's not scary. Come on. He thinks he's a god. He's going to govern like a god. What's to be concerned about that? And you see how far people have gone. And so the people on the left who reject Christianity as a crazy religious, you worship a man you claim who came to earth and he was God, but they fall right into it, the secular guy, who he knows not a God. So, and again, I'm not saying this is the guy. I'm just saying from a Bible prophecy standpoint, this is very significant. I mean, he's going to step out, and Obama's still running around, still doing his stuff. And I think he thought he had godlike qualities too, to be honest with you. Now we have Macron, who's come on the scene, and there may be other people waiting in the wings. I have no doubt that they are. And eventually, there'll be a guy who'll come in and act like this, and people will give their allegiance to him. So it's, but he won't criticize terrorism, but he did come out and he criticized Israeli colonialism. I don't have time for this, but I mentioned this in a video I did, Streams of Ecumenism, a couple of years ago, that there was these plans to kind of merge the Christian denominations and Roman Catholicism back into the church in 2017, because that was the 500th anniversary of the start of the Reformation, and they could use that to show, see, Reformation's over, we're all unified again. I mean, Jerusalem was unified 50 years ago, now 500 years later, the church, and so these Reformed congregations, churches, endorsed this, that they said, we rejoice that the historical doctrinal differences on the doctrine of justification no longer divide us. The signing there, which took place, get what town they did for making a symbol? Wittenberg. Must be seen as another important milestone on the journey towards the full visible unity of Christians, not yet the end of the road, but a significant stage on the way. And the word is, before to the end of the year, the Anglicans are going to sign on to the same agreement, the Anglican Church. We had these terrible riots at the G20 meetings. I mean, and we had this thing with North Korea, which seems to be spinning out of control. And China and Russia are not helping us at all. He launched what appears to be a multi-stage intercontinental ballistic missile that can have multiple warheads. And he shot it straight up, so it didn't trigger, like defense systems. I mean, he's very sophisticated in the way he does this. He's getting the parts, it appears, from China. And then China comes over to the G20, and Trump and the Prime Minister of China, the Premier of China are meeting, and, oh, everything's fine, we'll help you out. But when push comes to shove, Russia and China don't help us. And the situation is, what do we do? What are the options? Okay, let me list for you the good options. There aren't any. Because it could be war, and who knows. I have a lot of clips that I could play about what went on at UNESCO this week and some of the things that are going on at the UN. And while the UN is not the all-powerful thing that some people make it out to be, the takeaway from what the UN is doing relative to the Israeli-Palestinian, the Israeli-Arab conflict is stunning from a Bible prophecy standpoint. Now, in Genesis, this is a timeline of Abraham's life. Now, you can't see it because a lot of things happen in Abraham. But remember, Abraham came into Hebron around 2000 BC, roughly. When he went, and Pam and I walked down a staircase that was from 4500 BC or before. So that means that the staircase, that was 2500 BC, I'm sorry. So that means that staircase was somewhere 500, 600, 700 years old when Abraham first came to Hebron. It was a city. And the interesting thing is that there is, especially towards the end of Abraham's life, I think he was around, around 175 when he died. And he had Isaac when he was 100 and Sarah was 90. I was looking through Genesis because we went to Hebron, and I thought, well, I'm going to look up the passages about Hebron. Now, we talked about Mamre a couple weeks ago. You can find that in my update. But in Genesis 23, and I won't read the whole thing, but Sarah's 127 years old and she dies. And so Abraham goes to this Hittite guy, and he wants to buy a burial place. Now, what the response of this guy that owns the place, the field and the cave, and there is some Jewish tradition that this cave was dug by Adam and Eve, and that's where they're buried, and it was the entrance, near the entrance to the Garden of Eden. I'm just saying that that's what some Jews believe. I'm not saying that it's true, but I'm telling you that because that's the significance that they attach to this particular place, this cave in Hebron, which was the subject in 2017 of at least 8 hours of meetings by this huge committee of people about World Heritage sites that took place in Krakow, Poland this week. Now, they had a bunch of things that they were concerned about: historical, cultural sites, religious sites, but they focused on Hebron. And so in Genesis chapter 23, we've already seen Mamre and what happened there. Abraham wants to bury Sarah in this cave at Hebron, but he wants to buy it. And so they offer it. Oh, we'll give it to you. You're great. And Abram gets up, and he communed with them, saying, "If it be of your mind that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and entreat me to Ephron the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he hath, which is in the end of his field. For as much money as it is worth, he shall give it to me for a possession of a burying place amongst you." And it goes on, and he says, "No, I want to give you this." Verse 11, "Nay, my Lord, hear me. The field give I thee, and the cave that is therein. I give it thee, in the presence of the sons of my people will give I it thee. Bury thy dead." And Abraham bowed down himself before the people of the land. And he spake unto Ephron in the audience of the people of the land, saying, "But if thou wilt give it, I pray thee, hear me. I will give thee money for the field. Take it out of me, and I will bury my dead there." Abraham wants to make a deal. And Ephron answered Abram, saying, "My Lord, hearken unto me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that betwixt me and thee? Bury therefore thy dead." And Abram hearkened unto Ephron, and Abram weighed to Ephron the silver which he had named in the audience of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, current money with the merchant. And the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field, and the cave which was therein, and all the trees that were in the field that were in all the borders around about were made sure unto Abraham for possession in the presence of the children of Heth before all that went in the gate of his city. Verse 20, "And the field and the cave that is therein were made sure unto Abraham for possession of a burying place by the sons of Heth." And what you see in the book of Genesis is, I got the point. I mean, really, how important is this place? Why? But it's a cave in a field, okay? Abraham bought it and he put Sarah in there. So what? And it keeps coming up over and over and over again throughout the whole book of Genesis. Why? I think the reason is because God wanted to establish the importance and the significance of that geographical point on the earth as a possession for Abraham and his descendants forever, and it's beat into our heads throughout the book of Genesis, so we will understand that in the end times, when we know things are going to happen about dividing the land, that we won't question who it belongs to. The world will, and the world has this big conference where they're focused on this cave in city, and they want to give it to Palestine. That's what the whole thing was about. And it goes on, and he buried her. Then in Genesis 25, Abraham gave up the ghost, verse 9, and his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, which is before Mamre. And it talks about then Isaac. Jacob comes to see him. He can't see anymore. He's blind. He dies. Where do they bury him? In the cave. Doesn't specifically say here Rebecca, but there's some indication in the way the text is worded that Rebecca dies. She's buried in the same place. Then in Genesis chapter 49, Jacob's in Egypt. And he calls all of his people about, and he says, "Don't bury me here. This is not where I should be buried. I'm a Jew. I'm Israel. Bury me in the land of my fathers. Promise me that you'll take an oath that you will do this." And so when Jacob dies, they have this thing, and bury me in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite for a possession of a burying place. And so here's this theme again. So we're now 26 chapters later in Genesis, and they're still emphasizing the fact that Abraham bought this place for a reason. And his generations after him believed it. There they buried Abraham and Sarah's wife in this cave. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife, and there I buried Leah. The purchase of the field and of the cave that is in therein was from the children of Heth. So we bought it. Take me there. And in chapter 50, verse 13, and his sons carried him into the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave, the field of Machpelah, which Abraham bought with the field for a possession. Okay, I've got it. Who bought it? Abraham. Who did he buy it from? The Hittite, the sons of Heth. And it's before Mamre. You read about that in Genesis 13 and 18. Why is this important? For thousands of years, the Jews have lived and worshiped in Hebron. It is to this day the second most holy place in Judaism behind the Temple Mount. There are structures that were built at the Temple Mount and by Herod in Jerusalem and over the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, which commemorate the fact this is where Abraham was buried. This is where the temple stood. Herod was a very smart guy. Not very nice, but he was a master builder, and he built to commemorate these places specifically. Temple Mount, Hebron, Mamre. Now, he may have had an ulterior motive about it. He may have wanted to set up a site of pilgrimage so he could, take a cut off the top. I don't know. But he built there because these were demonstrably holy sites. And when he built Machpelah before the birth of Christ, over 2,000 years ago, it was about 2,000 years after Abraham had bought the place. And so now we have 4,000 years of undeniable history connection of the Jewish people to that place. And what does the UN spend time this week doing? It's a Palestinian place. Yeah, the Jews have been there for a while. They belong in Hebron. That is Judea. And in 1929, there was a rumor started by the Hajj Aman el-Husseini at the Temple Mount. A lot of people think he was the uncle of Yasser Arafat. He collaborated with the Nazis in the 30s and 40s about getting rid of the Jews. And he started a rumor and said that the Jews were going to take over the Temple Mount and get rid of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And they had a riot in Hebron, and they attacked Jews in Hebron, and they killed, by account, 67 or 69 of them. And 80 years later, in the Wall Street Journal, of all places, on the anniversary of that, it happened in August of 1929. Until 1929, this is the Wall Street Journal I'm quoting from. Jews had lived in Hebron for 3 millennia. There, according to Jewish tradition, Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah to bury Sarah. You know what? It's Christian tradition too. Why? Because we believe the Old Testament. Ever since, religious Jews revered Hebron as the burial site of their matriarchs and patriarchs. Conquered, massacred, and expelled over the centuries, Jews always returned to the sacred place. After 1267, under Muslim rule, no Jews were permitted to pray inside the magnificent enclosure that Herod had built. And then, as part of the Oslo Accords that were entered into in 1993, in January of 1997, they came up with an agreement pursuant to some of the language there to divide Hebron into areas H1 and H2. And here's a modern map, and I've been there. Pam's been there. Here's a little closer place. The red area here on the right is the cave of it says here the Al Ibrahim Mosque. It's the Herod building that has a mosque on one side and a Jewish synagogue on the other. And it shows all these roads, like the red road there on the left, that's no man's land. When we were there, 6 weeks ago, we drove on that road. There's structures on both sides of it. There's Jewish checkpoints. I think this is Israeli Defense Force base, an IDF base. And there are these things. This is the road. What's the name of that road? Al-Shadura? I can't remember. Well, anyway, you can look it up. See here, it says, "Welcome to Apartheid Street." And these used to be Arab shots, but it's no man's land now. And it's when you're in Israel, you are struck by the division. I mean, you see there's watchtowers on all these buildings. You see the soldiers driving around and putting up video cameras. And it's a divided place. I mean, of all the places on the earth, the most glaring example of it that smacks you in your face is Hebron. You can feel it driving down the street, walking on the street. There are places to go into Old Hebron that have those circular things with the bars on one side. You can get in but not out through that exit. That Palestinians have to go into to get into their area. There are other places where the Jewish settlements are similarly protected. There are soldiers there around. It is the epicenter of the conflict between Jews and Arabs, Palestinians, Muslims, whatever you want to call it. And so here in Krakow, Poland this week, the world was obsessed with making a determination. It is a magnificent structure. I got this picture from my friend Brian Schauger. By the way, he puts out a thing every day at the JerusalemJournal.net called the Keim Report. Updates headlines. He does it 6 days a week. He actually lives in one of the nice Palestinian areas there, near Bethlehem, just over the separation wall. And so you might want to check that out. I post it on my timeline most every day, JerusalemJournal.net/categories/headlines. And it's a great synopsis, and it updates every day, so you get current things that are going on. This conflict is all over the place. Nikki Haley, she, said UNESCO was going to waste their vote on this, and immediately the Palestinian Authority said Nikki Haley is racist, which means anti-Palestinian. There was this meeting took place. They actually voted on it. Let's see if there's.
Thank the countries who stood by our side.
Okay, what happened? This is on July 4th, and I don't have time to play the clip because you can find it at UN Watch YouTube channel. This is the Israeli delegate, and he says, "You're attacking Jews 30 kilometers from Buchenwald and Auschwitz, where millions of our people died. You want us to give up Jerusalem? We're never giving up Jerusalem because we remember the memory of that." Now, Bible prophecy tells us that there's troubling time coming and Jerusalem will be trampled under the Gentiles for 42 months. That's going to happen. We have to acknowledge that. But there will be resistance to that. And so what he did was, he said, maybe I can fast forward this enough. He said, "Would you join me and stand in a moment of silence to recognize what happened just down the road?" And the room stood up. Okay, that's great. But then, after that was over, the floor was given to the Cuban representative. I want you to watch. I think I need to show you this.
The floor goes to Cuba.
Now you'll hear the translator, but watch her actions.
Chair. I think that only the chair can ask for a minute of silence. I do think that this is an incorrect
I want you to watch her
interpretation
attitude
of this
as
decision. I think the decision
She's
has been
fired up.
manipulated once again. When what we have done, this committee does not take any decisions concerning measures against Israel nor against the Jewish people. And I think that that is turning this meeting into a politicized circus. Some of the what we have just heard from the delegate of Israel is opening up the discussion on the debates, and the decision that we have just taken does not reflect any of that. Only the chair can request a minute of silence. So with your indulgence, let me request, Mr. Chairman, that we stand for a minute of silence for all of the Palestinians who've died in the region. Thank you.
And so they all stood and applauded. They cut the sound out, though, because you can't hear them applaud. They're applauding during their moment of silence. So here was what happened. Then they had, a few days later, that was Tuesday, then Friday they had the vote.
What is clear is that the threats and violations are systematic and long-standing. They have a significant impact on the lives of ordinary citizens, resulting in the gradual depopulation of the old town, although this is to a degree now being reversed, and also interfere with the conservation of cultural heritage assets. Over time, this can be seen to threaten the resilience and sustainability of urban life and the conservation of the property.
Given all this, the committee should take its responsibilities according to Article 11 of the Convention. Inscribe Hebron al-Khalil Old City on the World Heritage List in danger and publicize it immediately.
The envelopes and the voting papers have been distributed. The Secretariat is ready whenever you want to proceed. Thank you.
If I may inform you about the results. Majority required 10. Votes for yes, 12. Votes. Let me please finish. Votes for no, 3, abstention, 6. Ladies and gentlemen, it means that decision 41,8b.1 is adopted as amended.
And then they applauded the fact that they're now saying that this belongs to the Palestinians. But it's not a political decision, okay? You see how the left projects this gal from Cuba? World Heritage inscribes new site and approves extension of existing site on UNESCO's World Heritage List. This is an old picture of Hebron. You can see the Herodian structure there. And this Herodian structure has been through earthquakes, and it exists like it did at the time of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago. Okay? There is no doubt. And so they've got this thing that's come out. They then turn up, so they get the Simon Wiesenthal Center sends a guy, and he has this to say. Listen to what he has.
100,000 members worldwide, and also concerned Jews and Christians worldwide. We have the greatest respect for the World Heritage Committee's work and has called upon it in the past for the protection of Auschwitz when a discotheque was opened within its protected zone. Unfortunately, to paraphrase the German strategist von Clausewitz, that diplomacy is war by other means. Since the Palestinian entry to UNESCO in November 2011, the World Heritage Committee has become a heritage as war by other means. In fact, a battlefield. From 2012, the Church of the Nativity, 2014, Batir, we know as Beitar, the site of the Bar Kokhba Jewish revolt against the Roman occupation in 132. To the Western Wall and the Temple Mount of Solomon, ID theft is a voracious campaign. At this meeting in Poland, on soil soaked with Jewish blood, to witness the ravages on Jewish affinity to Jerusalem and now the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron, could only be matched by the temerity of an amalgam drawn between 6 million Jews shot and gassed not 70 kilometers from here in Auschwitz-Birkenau and Against that, the support of Palestinians for moments of silence. To stand in silence in succession for both is a form of Holocaust revisionism. Calling Israelis, casting Israelis as Nazis violates the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and the European Parliament's working definition of anti-Semitism and its signatory countries all represented here. Mr. Chairman, no other people or religion has been so maligned in the World Heritage Committee. We would have been the first to protest were the victim here have been Islam or Islamic heritage. The Judeo-Christian heritage is continually under attack in this chamber. Mr. Chairman, save the World Heritage Committee from further abuse, from fast-track demands based on spurious claims to emergency, while other member states wait for years to inscribe their heritage. Mr. Chairman, find the means to leave this politicization to New York. The World Heritage Committee must return to its pristine integrity, the acknowledgement, protection, preservation of heritage in an atmosphere of peaceful dialogue, what we call tikkun olam, to redeem and improve the world's heritage in mutual respect for the narrative of the other. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, the music there, by the way, was an indication that he's over time. Okay? And by the way, don't anybody get any ideas. I see where you're coming. I got my timekeeper back there, you know. So this magnificent structure, and you saw the graphic of the Temple Mount, you see the comparison, how the structures are similar. This was condemned by Canada, Australia, the United States. Breitbart reported this morning, Palestinians have removed, gives Trump reason to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Nikki Haley issued a statement. The UNESCO vote on Hebron is tragic on several levels. It represents an affront to history. Today's vote does no one any good and causes much harm. It undermines the trust that is needed for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process to be successful. People tweeted, Michael Oren, former ambassador to the United States. Now, I think he's still a member of the Knesset. Peter Lerner, what a mockery by UNESCO. They should come to Hebron and get educated on the Jewish history of the place. I wish every Christian could go there. It's hard to get to. I told you that from the apartment we were using in Jerusalem, I typed in Cave of Machpelah or Hebron, and it came up on Google Maps, and it said that route is not possible. Well, it was, and I'm so grateful that we were able to go. Israel cut off funding. One of the related groups to UNESCO kind of came to do a site survey, and Israel said, go away. We're not letting you in. They brought in ambassadors from other countries, UNESCO ambassadors, delegates, to take a tour, to learn the history of the place. This is what they need to do. I bring this all up for this, and we have to close because I'm over time as usual. In Joel chapter 3, it brings into focus why God had Moses write in Genesis so many times that Abraham bought the cave. It was his possession for a burying place. It was important, and for thousands of years, the Jews have never wavered in the importance of that site to them. But the Bible tells us in the end times, in Joel chapter 3, verse 1, for behold, in those days and in that time when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted or divided my land. And so what you see, while the World Heritage and Committee of UNESCO doesn't have the actual power, it shows the spirit of the world going on to deny what the Bible says. And so mega church pastors like that guy who said, you obsess over the details of Scripture? Well, what are you doing? I'm figuring out why God made that place important and why it's going to be important in the end times. And we need to pay attention to that because more and more is coming. I know you in the Times of London this week equals Israel seeks buffer zone in Syria against Hezbollah. There's so much going on the borders, particularly the northern borders of Israel. And we know that this is also prophetic. Now, is this exactly the time? I don't know. I'm just telling you, all the players that are supposed to be involved, Iran, Persia, Russia, Syria, they're all there. They have 150,000 missiles. They have tunnels they've built. And they're putting up their defenses. But it looks like the world's against them. And you go to Krakow, Poland, near Auschwitz, and they're saying, that's a Palestinian site. We don't care about history. There will come on the scene a world leader who will support all of this stuff. He'll say, I don't care about history. I don't care about those Jews. And at that time, the Jews are warned, you better flee when you see this happen in the temple. And so what do? I think we need to warn them. Now, I don't think it'll be accepted. Hey, we got the IDF, we got the Israeli Air Force. Thanks for telling us, John, but we got everything under control. And God's going to work a mighty work among those people, we know, prophetically, but they need to be warned because some of them are going to pay attention. So just pray they get the message. Pray we get the message out to them. And this is I think this is very significant what happened with regard to Hebron. Passage after passage after passage in the Old Testament says it was bought by Abraham. Guess what? I believe that. And yes, Pastor, whoever think the Bible, I obsess about the Bible, I obsess over those details. I will go to Israel again, and I will make every effort to go to Hebron to remember and understand. Let's pray. Father, thanks for your word. Bless us as we go this week, and just pray that you'll be with those that listen. We pray for the Wilcox family south of here. Pray for Jonathan as they're making decisions today and doing tests to see whether he's brain dead from his accident. Just pray you'll be with him, heal him, and be with his family. In Jesus' name, amen.